Hey church, and welcome to this week's small group. Now, we're in our second week of finishing the race, and we're talking about baptism this week. We're going to take this small group, and the majority of it is going to be a lot of just discussion questions amongst you and your small group. So let's just get started. If you have been baptized, share with the group what the experience was like for you. And what do you remember most about your baptism? And how did it affect you at that time? The next couple questions are this. How would you describe baptism to someone who has never seen anyone get baptized? And if a friend who is a new believer in Jesus asks you if they should be baptized, what would you say? I usually describe baptism as something that believers in Jesus do to say yes to Jesus publicly in front of everyone. Getting baptized is saying, I'm all in with Jesus. Basically, from now on, whatever Jesus asks me to do, the answer is yes. And if a new believer is truly all in with Jesus, man, I say, get baptized. Next, I want you to read Acts chapter 2, verses 36 through 41. And according to these passages, how long after people say yes to Jesus did it take for them to get baptized? And should we require new believers to get teaching before they get baptized? What I want you to notice is that in Scripture, people usually said yes to Jesus and then they got baptized the very same day. You know, I used to think that people should get a whole lot of teaching before they get baptized, but I'm going to be honest with you, I really cannot defend that from a biblical point of view anymore. And I believe that once you say yes to Jesus, if you're truly all in with Jesus, it's time to get baptized. In the early centuries of Christianity, largely due to persecution, individuals were not considered Christians unless they were baptized members of a church. Baptism was also a prerequisite for receiving the Lord's Supper. You know, and churches in other countries still continue to practice these traditions to this day, even though there's no persecution in some of those countries. So my question is this: should the Pulse of Miami Church require people to be baptized before participating in the Lord's Supper? Why or why not? And if a friend was baptized as an infant and she asks you if she should be rebaptized as an adult, what would you say to her? And finally, if her family views her desire to be baptized as a betrayal of the family, how should your friend explain her desire to be baptized to her family? You know, when we started the Pulse of Miami Church, I thought that people needed to get baptized in order to take the Lord's Supper, because that's what I had been taught. But actually, one of our members challenged me and said, where do you find that in Scripture? And so, I searched through Scripture and came out on the other side going, you know what, there's nothing in Scripture that tells me that somebody shouldn't take the Lord's Supper just because they have not yet been baptized. You know, we've had a lot of people in our church that were baptized as infants. And when they say yes to Jesus, I say, you know, baptism is really meaningful when we get baptized after we say yes to Jesus. And so the way that I advise most people to explain it to their family is to say, you know, when I was a kid, you baptized me and that was your decision to raise me in the ways of Jesus Christ. But now I've made that decision for myself. And so this baptism points to your faithfulness as my family in raising me in the ways of Christ. Next, I want you to read Acts chapter 8, verses 34 through 39. Does it matter if you are baptized by sprinkling or dunking in the water? And how should we baptize at the Pulse? And why? And if someone who was already baptized as a believer wanted to get baptized again to recommit their lives to Christ, would that be okay? Why or why not? You know, as your pastor, I'm going to say, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it really matters to God whether you were sprinkled or dunked. But the reason why at the Pulse we immerse people in water is, well, as you saw in that last passage, they went into the water and then they came up out of the water. There was no sprinkling going on. In fact, in the New Testament, whenever it says the word baptize, it's the original Greek word of bautizo. And bautizo means to immerse. In fact, they used bautizo in everyday language. It's kind of like, you know, if you really want to get those dishes clean, you will bautizo them. You will immerse them in water. And we kind of spiritualize the word, but at the end of the day, we believe that it means to immerse. It's not that big of a deal. But at the Pulse, we're going to try to do it as closely to Scripture as we possibly can. And if somebody wants to recommit their lives to Christ by getting baptized again, you know what I say? Man, why not? Read now Romans chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. How might watching someone else's baptism inspire us to finish the race well, to focus on the gospel of Jesus Christ? And finally, when you're done answering that question, close together as a small group. Pray and ask Jesus to help you live out your baptism, that commitment that you made at baptism, for the rest of your life. Have a great rest of your small group, and we'll see you on Sunday.